Thank you, Jeffrey and Ali, for a fantastic presentation. We're going to start our Q&A now. I'll ask again that people type any questions in the Q&A function located at the top of your screen. And please don't post any further questions in the chat, as they will not be moderated and we will miss them. So our first question up is for Jeffrey from Charles. Will this design process produce data tools that'll be useful to service providers other than the model organization? In this case, are the data tools produced useful outside the Calgary Drop-In Center?
So thanks for your question, Charles. Thanks for your question, Charles. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of...
We're going to start our Q&A now.
There we go.
I'll ask again.
Thanks for your question, Charles. I've got, sorry, I was just getting a little bit of audio strangeness there. So in general, I'm a big fan of open source software. We do try to release everything that we do for just general use in the community. In this particular case, we developed these Power BI tools specifically for use on Calgary Drop-In Center IT systems. And I think I can answer kind of three questions in one here, because there was another question about how we justified the Power BI pricing model to be suitable for use with our stakeholders. So the Calgary Drop-In Center was migrating their IT systems to a cloud-based sort of Microsoft solution, and Power BI was sort of included functionality in that migration. So they had Power BI in-house already, and we were just sort of helping them to explore how to use it in different ways. So the tools that we've developed specifically for the DI only work within the DI because they're using a custom IT system. But if we were, for example, developing tools for use with HIFIS, those should be able to be relatively portable. And there was a question from another person, not Aaron, from Chris, wondering about integrating Power BI with HIFIS. And in general, that should work pretty well. So HIFIS 4, at least under the hood, is got a Microsoft SQL or SQL database backend, and HIFIS or Power BI should plug into that pretty well. So yeah, I'm not sure what the problem might be there.
All right, thanks for that, Jeffrey. Ali, this question is for you from Charles again. If data completeness is realistically less than 100%, does that mean there should be very few data that's required?
That's a great question. And in general, I think that it is a really great exercise for communities to go through to say, like, what are actually the necessary data points? One of the things that I find is that occasionally communities may want to collect more data than is feasible for a frontline staff to be able to have enough hours in the day to collect on every client. And in general, it's much more useful to have very complete data on a small number of really important data points than very incomplete data on a whole bunch of different things. There's not a lot you can do. You wanted to analyze, say, what source of income do my clients have if you only know that about a quarter of your clients or a third of your clients. So it's a great exercise to say, what are the most important data points? And let's focus on getting those really good. And then once you get to a point where you have really good completeness for those few data points, you can work on expanding out.
Thanks for that, Ali. Over to you, Jeffrey. Aaron has asked a number of questions. Were the collaborator diagrams generated based on the notes collected in the interviews, or were they estimated based on general knowledge? And what steps did you take to ensure staff adoption of the tool?
So the collaborators diagrams were based directly on the interviews, all the notes that we captured in the interviews. And the process is pretty strict about that. I mean, it certainly is possible to include general knowledge as well, but you're really trying to capture the user's perspective. And you know, we didn't really take any extra steps to ensure staff adoption, because that, again, is the great thing about this process. Because staff is involved in the whole design of the tool, they're really engaged, right? They start at the very beginning, they tell us about themselves, we brainstorm with them, we throw ideas around, and when they get the tool to use, they're really familiar with what its capabilities might be, what they're expecting, and how it will help them. And so they were pretty enthusiastic to just use it right out of the gate. It's not like where we just throw something over the wall, or we're giving them something brand new that they've never seen before.
Okay, thanks for that. Ali, back to you. I was wondering if you could discuss more of why that 95% is a typical baseline for completeness. What kind of factors in there?
I'm afraid I don't have a perfect answer for you. I have, as I mentioned, it's a requirement in the United States that communities collect data that is accurate and complete and all of those other fun things. Another thing that is required in the United States is that every community needs to put together a data quality plan. And so if you Google literally any community in the United States, you will be able to find a data quality plan for them, and that will list all of their data quality benchmarks. And so it just seems to be a sort of standard that 95% is used. So as for the why, you're always going to have some situations where you're not able to complete all of the data that you would like. So imagine you might be doing a turnaway over the phone and you're talking to someone, but you don't get all of the information before they hang up. You tell them that you don't have any space. So you're not able to get information about that. Or perhaps you might be doing a shelter intake, but your client might be inebriated and they're not able to give you all of the data that you want at the time. You don't get clear answers. So there's always going to be some circumstances where you don't get the data that you're looking for, but you should always strive for as complete as possible. So that's why it's 95 instead of 100, but you could say, let's go for 97% or 98%, high 90s.
Okay, thank you for that. Jeffrey, we have a question here from Jessica. Were service users engaged with as well as program staff? And could you expand maybe a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for that question. So on this particular project that I presented today, service users were not engaged. It was strictly an activity that we conducted with staff. However, we're currently involved in a larger, better funded, i.e. better funded project to extend this user experience design process for shelters that work with vulnerable youth. And that program does have consultation with service users front and center, basically. So we're going to develop data tools, by consulting with frontline staff. But then we're going to sit down with a group of staff people and vulnerable youth and say, hey, this is basically the story that these tools are telling us. Does this resonate with you? Is this you? And another component of that project will be just having focus groups with vulnerable young people, just talking about data in general and just saying, what's important to you, and what would you like the people who are caring for you to know about you, right? Because at the end of the day, data is just about telling somebody's story. When I work with frontline staff, they just really want to understand the person sitting across from them, and so that's where we're trying to go with the next project. So, but that's a really, really important point, because if what these tools say doesn't resonate with the people that we're trying to help, then we've missed the mark.
Okay, Ali, Jessica's asking, do you have any advice on how to deal with the anonymous clients in terms of data collection and data quality control?
So a partial answer to that question is it depends on what data system you're using. There are some out there that may allow you to, say, convert an existing anonymous client to like a non-anonymous client. And so in those cases, then there is perhaps a different answer on what to do with your data. However, to speak to that a little bit more generally, I think the best approach is that you are having some clients who are declining their consent for you to collect and share data. And so the issue is really related to how the consent is being presented to clients. This is an issue that actually varies quite a lot from community to community. Some communities tell me that, oh, we have tons and tons and tons of clients who decline, who don't want their information collected. And other places tell me, yeah, it's not an issue here. We have one or two, but that's all. So based off of that information, I theorize that there's a lot of difference from place to place, from organization to organization, about how staff are presenting the consent forms to clients, how staff may be trained on presenting the consent forms, what the consent forms themselves say. And so in some places, staff may be presenting it as optional. You don't need to sign this consent form, but if you do, good things might happen. And other places, staff might be saying like, we can really get you the best help if you sign here. Or they might be saying like, hey, it's not really a big deal. We will be protecting your information. So there's lots of different ways that it could be communicated. So if you're finding that you're having a lot of anonymous clients, and that's a problem for data quality, obviously, one place that I would start looking is what are your staff saying to clients? And what do your staff think about the consent forms themselves? Like, if they feel like it's another piece of red tape, then they're not going to be really enthusiastic about communicating it and getting people to sign the forms. So it might be helpful to just kind of sit nearby in an intake and just see what people are saying. Like, what are the frontline staff doing with the consent forms?
Okay. And Jeffrey, we have another question from Chris. What indicators, data were staff most interested in, and how do those indicators connect to measuring outcomes related to housing plans and housing outcomes?
Yeah, so the data features or indicators that the staff were most interested in were basically the parts of the data set that help them better understand the person that they were trying to house. So the job function that we were targeting were people who work with individuals on a one-on-one basis and try to put them in the best possible housing program that best fits them. And so they just wanted to understand the person's context. So how often had they accessed shelter? What was their experience in shelter? Were there problems, with security? Were there health problems? All things that had a bearing on what type of housing program would or wouldn't work for this individual. This was not a tool designed to measure outcomes. So this tool was just specifically for people trying to find good housing fits for individuals. It didn't track the people over time or report housing outcomes or anything like that. And that's actually a really important point, because when you're designing tools for frontline use, this particular job function it wasn't a big part of their job function to track outcomes of housing programs over time, right? So that wasn't really what they were interested in. You could imagine a different tool that does track outcomes, but that would be more useful for sort of managerial or leadership people, maybe higher up in the organization, that are putting these programs together. So there's no one tool that fits all.
Great. Well, we're getting to the end of the session. Thank you, Jeffrey and Ali, and for great presentations and for excellent answers to some of those questions. And I'd like to thank everybody that attended for your questions and participating. It's great to learn from each other. We just want to remind everybody to please complete the session evaluation located under the video player besides the discussion tab. And I'd like to remind everybody that Dr. Andrew Buzareri's keynote presentation will begin in about 15 minutes. So thank you for attending this session. We all know how important data is in ending homelessness. So, and thank you for being leaders in doing that.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your questions.